welcome to another Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric. It is the end of February and we are only days away from the beginning of March. And so I thought I'd come to my comfy chair and share with you what I've been doing since I last made a video. And I guess you could call this a quilting video. But I hope my knitters and my spinners will stick around and listen and see the content that I'm about to share and hear the stories. I do plan to talk a little bit about some of the hand dyeing that I'm doing, in this case with fabric, because I've finally cracked the, I guess, code of how to dye my cotton fabric in a similar process to my wool and wool fiber, my wool fiber and my wool yarn. Excuse me. I have made leaps and bounds, and I figured out finally how to do the dyeing process that is a little more easy and less exhausting for me. So stick around and we'll talk about that in a moment. We'll get to the quilt that you can see here next to me also here in a few moments. But first, I want to share with you a quilt that I forgot to share last month when or last video when I talked about the different projects I had been working on. I will share it right here. It is a wall hanging that I made. The designs were designed for in the hoop baby bibs, and they are zodiac themed. Not having a need for baby bibs, I took the designs and put them on quilt blocks, and decided, I've always wanted to try a black quilt. They can be so wonderful as far as vibrant colors when it comes to machine embroidery applied to them. And so I decided this was a wonderful way to use it. The title at the top, you will see, it says New Year. I thought, what a wonderful way to bring in the new year and have another New Year themed quilt by sharing the zodiac. Now, understanding that the zodiac year calendar, the zodiac calendar year and the standard, is it the Gregorian? I think that's what we use, calendar year, they don't match up. But for me, it's a wall hanging. It's in the entrance of my home. Is to bring in some color and have a little fun. But the New Year part of it is actually just pinned on. The letters are done on felt. They are done with heat transfer vinyl. I made them so that they could be removed because then I could always change them out later if I wanted to, or just take them off for washing. You know, whatever is, whatever the mood strikes me. But it was a lot of fun to make it. I loved just using bright and vibrant colors and having it just pop off of a black background. So I forgot to share that with you in my last video. It was one that I had done up in January. I'm thrilled with it. The designs are a design pack by Creative Kiwi, embroidery designs. But yeah, just a lot of fun. I just loved it. And when I had finished it, like with the pillows that I had been showing, I knew I wanted to do some more quilting. And I had no idea that I'd be basically doing a lot of quilting in February. But it has been something that has just felt right. And I tend to just listen to my body and my emotions. And February was a month to do a lot of hand quilting. So the next quilt that I want to share with you, I've been working on. I have two variations of this one. One that I did, I did paste the top together, both of the tops back in, I think it was the winter of 2017. It was a sample quilt that a club that was on Facebook that I was doing, and it was supposed to be a block of the week. And for those of us that understood quilt construction, quilt piecing. Most of us didn't wait for the, each week to do them, because they made the overall quilt picture layout available to us right from the beginning. And for people who do a lot of piecing of quilts, we recognize how, very easily to draft our own patterns. It's just math, which, yes, can be problematic for some, but when you get in the habit of doing it all the time, it becomes simple math versus the complicated math that they had us doing in school. So I wanted to share this. It's a pink and black. The black fabric in this has little tiny flowers on it, and it's a fabric that that was given to me. Huge amount of it, and it is so when we have a lot of time, you have different ways of having your fabric. The fabric can be, the threads of the fabric can be dyed and then woven, but a lot of the fabric that we use in the quilting world, unless it's a solid color, it is a printed fabric, and the print, kind of sits on top, kind of sinks in a little bit, but it's printed on top of the fabric. Every so often back in the late 70s, but more like in the 80s and the early 90s, you would have a fabric that when they printed it, it felt very much like stiff paint on top, because it was just printed so heavy and so dark. And for quilting, it really is not, it's not the highest quality. It, I think, works great for other type of things, but it was marketed as a quilting or sewing clothing, and in both of those cases, this fabric didn't work very well. Even just getting this one done, I had to be very careful, because the that finish on it, that print, actually makes it a little easier to tear. So I had to be a little more careful when we were basting it. But I have quilted it. I did not quilt it nearly as much as its partner, which I did 2 of them at the time. The one is more of browns and taupes and has Asian crane scene on it. I will try to find pictures of everything. I know that I have included pictures in the videos where we were doing a bunch of the basting in the summer, fall, a year or 2 ago. But I'll try to include pictures of the things that I'm talking about. But this pink and black quilt that I just finished, it really is quite pretty. The pink was, again, a fabric that had been given to me. So I had this very intense pink, and I had this black that had a matching pink in it. And I took the leap and said, why not? And I put them together, because what I was trying to do in 2017, knowing that my husband would be retiring from the military, knowing that we were going to move, I was trying to convert fabric into quilt tops, especially when it was fabrics that were not dear to my heart. It's a little easier to transport a quilt top than it is to have the bolts of fabric. It also helped me go through all of my fabric stash and decide what was stuff I really wanted to keep, and what in my fabric stash of stuff that people had given me over the years I could donate to a good organization. I found an organization that works to help teachers have supplies in their classrooms. So I decided to take the leap, and while I'm more of a purple person than a pink person, I do like pink, especially, as you can see, pink with black. It is a very visually stunning, I think, combination. So I've been working on quilting that, and with that one, I did not use a frame as I was quilting it. And one of the things that definitely happens when you're not using a frame is you can pull, when you're doing the running stitch, the quilting, the running stitches, you can pull the thread a little tight. That's one of the advantages of that heavily printed stiff fabric, is that it didn't allow for really tight pulling thread. But I'm really pleased with how it turned out. And yeah, I'm not sure where. It's probably just going to be folded up and put it in a box for future need, because right now there's not a bed for it, but it will eventually find whoever's supposed to have it. For now, it's finished, and I like having a finished object. So I have those two quilts that I've been working on. Before I move into this one, I just wanted to share a picture of one of the projects that's taken up a lot of my time in February. I am putting together a farm and forest applique quilt. It's meant to be a wall hanging, and each of the little critters and objects, they're all from design packs by Creative Kiwi. I've just had so much fun making these. They can be made as what I call freestanding applique, so they can actually be on their own, as I've shown you with some bunnies and stuff from in my past video. They don't have to have they don't have to be attached to anything. But in this case, I've made them all up and I have attached them. I'm in the process. In the picture, they are not attached. I have started attaching them. And once they're all attached, then I will baste it and start quilting on it. And hopefully, maybe by April, I'll have it quilted. But I was really thrilled with this. I love the design. I love the critters. They're really cute. It's a reminder that we do not have to have children in our house. We do not have to even have grandkids. We can do these things for ourselves. If it gives us joy, we can make them for ourselves. And this one is totally for me. The black and white cow is reminiscent of the cows that I grew up on my grandfather's dairy farm, and he had black and white Holsteins, and so the black and white cow is paying homage to my youth on a dairy farm. The red barn, we did not have a red barn. We did have an old milk parlor that would have been nice if it was painted red. And but I'm not sure the red barn was something that was really prevalent in the area of the country that I grew up in. But it's reminiscent of so many of the red barns that different parts of the United States have. The red tractor, on the other hand, is paying homage to the red tractors. It was so funny. So growing up, there was your John Deere tractor people, and then there was, in our area, the International tractors. The Internationals were red, John Deere were green. My grandfather was an International tractor person, to such an extent that his old 1930s, what we called putt-putt tractor, he painted it red. It was a John Deere, and he painted it red. So, the red tractor definitely pays homage to the red tractors that were all around our farmyard when I was growing up. The sheep, and so there's two sheep, and there is what's supposed to be a llama, but I did it in a faux fur that makes it look much more alpaca than llama. Those are, of course, paying homage to my current love of knitting and spinning and the fiber production world that I have so embraced this last decade or more. So we have then the black cat. Yes, I have two black cats in my house. I had a black cat prior. We've had now a total of 3 black cats in our family over the years. I decided I had to have a little black cat. The sheepdog is simply because he's just so cute. And how can you have a flock of sheep without a sheepdog? And everything else, well, it's much more wet. Yeah, some of it could be my backyard. Some of it, I think, is more if I lived in, Europe. We don't have hedgehogs here. I have not seen a raccoon yet. Thank goodness. I've heard them. So it's just, to me, it was bringing in the fact that farms, especially here in this area of Virginia, there's very little of a demarcation zone between a farm and the forest. They tend to merge. And I know I love watching programming out of the UK, and especially things like Spring Watch and Winter Watch, and seeing all the different animals, and seeing how the changes in the way we look at farming and nature working together more than keeping it separate. And so as I travel virtually around the UK, I think my little farmyard and forest collection may represent the UK more than here in Virginia. It's a merging of the worlds, I guess. That's the wonderful thing about quilting and fabric and fiber. You can basically make it whatever it is you want to, your own inspiration. You don't have to follow somebody else's rules. So I have been working on that. I will have an update on that one when it is done. But now that I've shown you what craziness I've been doing there, let me show you this quilt that I have here. It says Hatching Creativity. This is a design that I did up. Well, it's going on. Oh my goodness, it's going on. It's going on 15 years. Wow. Yeah, a decade and a half since I started the journey that led to this, where I am today. So back in 2008, in March, so that's the other reason I wanted to do this video now, is I always struggle a little bit in March. So we'll see if I can get a video out during that month, or we may just bookend March with the one now and the one at the end. But back in 2008, my mother passed away. And that was as anyone who has had to bury a parent knows, it is a long, or for that matter, anyone who has had to bury any loved one, it's a long year. Every time there's a milestone, every time there's a birthday, every time there's a holiday, it's the first time you've done it without that person in your life. And so 2008, it was a long year. And by the end of that year, towards the end of that year, so I think we were hitting about the 9-month mark. My family decided, my children and my husband decided that it would be good for me to have something that took me outside of the house, and gave me a little bit of a break from just the process. Because I was the estate agent for my mom's estate, and we didn't live in the same state. So her home was 9-hour drive from my home. So we had a lot of long road trips that year. And so my family decided that it would be good for me to have something that was a little different. And I took part in, I purchased a 1-year subscription to an machine embroidery club, for lack of a better term. And I would go in, and once a month I would go in and sew with other people who were doing the club. And it was wonderful. It got me out of my comfort zone. It got me out of the house. I started being much more active. And it was wonderful because just prior to my mom having passed away, the fibromyalgia had gotten so bad that we were worried that it was crippling. It was legitimately crippling me. And that was I couldn't knit and I couldn't crochet, and I was and I was just trying to push back against that. I'd been diagnosed just weeks before my mom passed away. And so everything was trying to push back. I wanted to be healthier. I wanted to take back the parts of my life that I could. So I started doing machine embroidery. I'd had the machine for I'd had the machine for 5 or 6 years by that point, but I had never really done it outside of my own little world, and this was the first time I really got involved in the bigger embroidery world. So we move ahead another year or so, and I'm now I belonged to a quilting club, and I was doing these kind of things. And as it turns out, there was a group of new quilters that got together at the same place, the same store that we did, that I did the machine embroidery. And we get together, and every month we decided that we would, maybe try a different block or something. And as the ever educational enthusiast, I thought it would be really wonderful to try to help show people that they could break out of their comfort zones, maybe use patterns that they considered old-fashioned or fabrics that they might think as ugly, but see how that they could come together and be something different. Because one of the things that I ran into all the time, and I run into this even now, oftentimes people see something that has been done in the past a certain way, and they think, oh, well, I don't like that. I want something new and modern and flashy and vibrant and edgy. And quilt patterns especially, I think patterns entirely, if you change out the fabric, if you change out the layout, if you change out, just tweak one or two different things, something that was old all of a sudden looks brand new. And you don't have to discard something simply because when it's first presented to you, it doesn't look as shiny or as spectacular as maybe something that somebody else has put together and relabeled, if nothing else. So for me, I always found it frustrating when I heard people say, oh, well, that seems so old-fashioned. And one of the things, traditional quilt blocks, oftentimes we see them in traditional quilt layouts, with fabrics that are faded, fabrics that didn't have the same kind of dyes, or just different than what we have today. And so I sat down at the computer and started to put together layouts to show you how a specific traditional quilt block would look if it was laid out next to its another one of its type, changing the colors. And that kind of morphed into me. Designing 12 quilt blocks. So it was never my intention of making a sampler quilt. It was to highlight 12 individual blocks and how those 12 blocks could come together rather than a 12 block sampler quilt. So of course the fabrics that I picked initially to just show how the block was constructed, I wasn't worried about them fitting together in something. I wasn't worried about them even being visually exciting, but I did want to use up some fabrics that I wasn't in love with. Because of course, if you're just showing basic construction of a block, it doesn't have to be your favorite fabrics that you'd like to make a quilt out of. So that means I have 2 of these. And I made all the blocks, the initial blocks, every month. But then everything got put aside because life tends to interrupt. And so everything got put aside, and hold on one second. Talk about life interrupting. So I am back. So as I was saying, life interrupted the putting of these blocks together until about 2017, when realizing that I'd rather move with finished quilt tops rather than a whole stack of blocks, I started to piece together the 12 of my original blocks. And because I really wanted the patterns that I made for these, they were never meant to be a set, never meant to be something that was a kit or something that was all done together. They had a purpose at the time, and they were just to introduce old-fashioned blocks in a new-fashioned way. So I decided it would be nice to have a quilt that visually popped, that would go along with the instructions that I have for each block. Long story short, I made the second top so that it would match a more visually appealing set of instructions than my original quilt did. So 2017, the tops got put together. Fast forward, and last week my husband helped me baste these so that I could start quilting on them. Oh my goodness. So yes, life gets in the way. I feel like I've lost my train of thought, but I'm really pleased with it. My husband was so wonderful when we were basting him. I love this one. I love the colors of this one. It makes me think of spring. Thus the reason that I'm quilting it first, because I want to put it up on the wall as a spring themed wall hanging. But my husband really likes the other one that I made, and he likes the way the colors are subtle and subdued. And there are two unique blocks in it. This one here that has the machine embroidery, and there's also a paper piecing one that I did. It's called Yucca in Bloom. It reminded me, I was inspired by the yucca plants that we had in front of our house in Colorado. So it's funny how things can be put aside and then brought back out, and how it makes us remember things, and how even things that were done in a very, very stressful time can then years later be seen, and what you remember is the good pieces, not the stressful part of the time. The designing of these blocks, the doing of these blocks, they were during a very stressful time. I was talking to my kids the other day, and they were talking about, how things tend to come in bouts. Well, most people don't have. I had it was the aughts were a tough decade, and 2010 was a very it was another very tough year. But when I pull these things out, when I bring them out now, I have fondness. I remember all of the time with fondness. I don't, even though I remember the struggle of those years, I feel the joy and warmth of the project, not the stuff I was overcoming by doing the project. And that brings me, wrapping this up, back to the wall hanging I'm working on right now, that's all the cute little fluffy critters. The background that I'm applying it to is hand dyed. The critters, except for where it's obvious that I'm using faux fur, the critters are made with hand dyed fabrics. And if we go back 30 years, when my husband and I first met, when we go to those early, that first 5, 6, first decade together. In that first decade together, before I had a machine that would do these kind of things, I started dabbling in hand dyeing fabric. And I knew nothing about the process, and it was before YouTube videos and tutorials, and before, I mean, the internet was a brand new thing. So finding out information was word of mouth in a library. But I dabbled, and I played, and I had some real success, and I had some real fun, and I had some stuff that wasn't such success. And when I started making clothing for my daughter, I would dye muslin, and then I would take dishwasher gel, which is basically bleach gel, because even back then we didn't have all of the bleach pens that you can now get in the laundry sections. But then I would go through with the gel, and I'd paint on designs on the bottom of the skirts and the dresses and the pajamas and things, in order to take color off to where there was now a design. So basically I was doing a bit of a reverse batiking, and I loved it. And I have a whole stack of cherished hand-dyed fabrics that I put together all those years ago, before I had the stuff from before I had kids. I made a quilt for my mother-in-law that had tulips on it, and I hand dyed all of the tulip fabrics, and I kept every scrap, every remnant, every scrap. I have a big jar that has the scraps in it. I have the remnants, and I kept all of that because I wanted to be able to do something more like that at a future date. Well, I spent last weekend dyeing up some more fabrics for this quilt that I'm working on, this critter quilt. And one of the things that with dyeing wool is so easy. I can put it in mason jars. I can contain it. The cleanup can be really easy. I put down big old towels on my counter, my kitchen surfaces. I can really contain everything. I can make it easy so that it's done and put away and doesn't have a multi-day mess. But cotton fabrics are not so easy. And doing tie-dye, I finally figured out how to do intense colored tie-dye. But the problem I always run into is that you have to keep the way that the fiber reactive dyes work. You have to keep the fabrics at a certain temperature for the best results. Well, my house is never that temperature, except for in the middle of the summer. And the last thing I want to do in the middle of the summer is dye fabrics and such. But I hadn't figured out a way to replicate the same small contained process until this weekend. So this weekend, I reread all the instructions. I looked at very carefully at the different types of instructions that the dye companies had. And then I gave it a try. And using immersion dyeing techniques for fiber reactive dyes, I started containing everything in mason jars. And it worked. It gives me the scrunched up, very textural look, the very tonal modeled type fabric that works really well for applique. In essence, a faux batik. I'm not putting any resist on it. I'm not doing anything other than scrunching up the fabric in order to make it so that the dye does not absorb evenly. And I discovered I could put them in the mason jars, let's say about a half-yard strip of fabric in a mason jar with the dye, put in the activator, let it sit for an hour, pull it out, rinse it out, and it worked. And I'm really pleased. So I know that this video has been long. I know that it's kind of gone all over the place a little bit, but there is a theme that's greater than just me sharing my quilt. I started hand dyeing fabric nearly 30 years ago. In that time, I've had gadgets and gizmos and all sorts of new technology come in into play. But the joy that I had sitting down, standing in the kitchen, using up my spoons, spoon theory, for those of you who want to look it up or not familiar, using up my energy, using up my reserves. The fun I had dyeing this fabric this time for these little critters. And I have more colors, and I have more fabric on its way and more dye. And I'm looking forward to delving into fabric as well as fiber in the upcoming months. But being able to take something that's plain and simple and maybe a little boring to some, and spending a little bit of time, a little bit of creative time, hatching some creativity, I was able to create something. I'm able to create something that is so individual, so unique, so one of a kind, and so me. And I had forgotten how much fun I had back all those years ago when I had very little money. Still don't have much money, but I have a lot more knowledge today. And sometimes as we age, sometimes as we go through life, we have a tendency to move beyond something that once gave us joy and pleasure because something new and fancy came along and replaced it. And then we get to a point that when we look back on it, when we revisit it, when we pull it out of a drawer and see it again, what we find ourselves experiencing is the positive memories of the time. Not the hardship, not the turmoil, not the difficulty. And so as I go into March, knowing that the things going on in my life behind the scenes makes this March an especially difficult one. Again, I'm going to try to create things that 10 and 15 years from now, I will look back on, my children will look back on and go, oh my goodness, I remember the wonderful of a pretty tough time, not the tough of that time. So it is a little long this time. I'm wishing all of you that have stuck with me to this point all the best. If you find yourself going into a little bit of a March madness and you need a little lift, I recommend, even if it's just buy yourself a kit. Get yourself a t-shirt, get yourself a tie-dye kit, and do a little tie-dyeing. Play with some color. Throw the rule book of what works and doesn't work out the window and throw together what you like. Because some of the prettiest yarns that I'm seeing on the market these days are by indie dyers who that's how they dye. And some of the most phenomenal pieces of art that I've seen are from the tie-dyers. There's Facebook groups that are dedicated to tie-dyeing. The colors, the intensity, the just joy of chaos but in an explosion of creativity. Creative chaos can be the real ticket to overcoming the madness that we sometimes can't avoid, especially during March. So I wish you all the best, and I will see you hopefully in the middle of March, and otherwise I will see you again before we get into April. That is my goal. That is what I hope is a promise to you. Until then, best wishes, and we will see you as soon as possible.